Welcome to the final Jubilee. This is Enoch the Theological Story, Part 6. In the last few episodes, we went over how Enoch 69 connected with the Genesis 3 story of Adam and Eve in the garden with the serpent. And we used multiple different religions and books to connect the story and compare the stories to show that Enoch connects to all these different religions. The next piece we're going to be doing is connecting the corruption of man and the falling of the sons of God into this story and where it began and how it started. We first started out with Cain and Abel, and Cain slew Abel. Then Lamech killed Tubal-Cain and Cain in chapter 4. And we talked about that in the last episode, the part when Eve and the serpent were together in the Garden of Eden. Some have a wise tale that Eve committed adultery with the serpent and that Cain's was the first child of Satan. But we definitely proved that that is wrong, and you can go back and listen to that episode. That was episode 5. All right, so we're going to get into where we left off, and we're going to read from the Book of Genesis, chapter 6, starting with the following sons of God. It is probably one of my favorite stories when we put the Apocrypha to it. The Book of Enoch fills in a lot of the story that is missing in Genesis 6 when the sons of God came down and saw the daughters of man. The Book of Jubilees that we talked about earlier back this story in a short version in chapter 4 saying Enoch testifies against the Watchers. The Watchers is also the title of the first book within the Book of Enoch that goes over Genesis 6, 1 through 5. Let's look at the comparing stories that bring this more alive with Enoch and Jubilees. Genesis 6, 1 through 5. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, "My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120. And the Nephilim are on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, and men of renown. The Lord saw that the wickedness of the man was in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continuously." All right, we're going to jump into the Book of Jubilees, 5, 1 through 3, to show a similar story. And it came to pass that when the children of men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the angels of God saw that on a certain year of this Jubilee, that they were beautiful to look upon. And they took themselves wives of all whom they chose, and they bare unto them sons. They were giants, Nephilim. And lawlessness increased on the earth, and all flesh corrupted its ways, alike men and cattle and beasts and birds, and everything that walketh on the earth, all of them corrupted their ways and their orders, and they began to devour each other. And lawlessness increased on the earth, and every imagine of the thoughts of all was thus evil continuously. And God looked up on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, and all flesh, and corrupted its order. And all that were upon the earth had wrought all manner of evil before his eyes. So that description there of Jubilees, comparing to Genesis 6, it was a little bit more detailed, and it put in a little bit of more of the blank there. But where did we get this evil? Where did it start? This evil, we're going to have to go back, actually, in the story of time before Genesis 6 is, because Genesis 6 actually includes part of Genesis 4. Jude 11, woe to them, for they walked in the way of Cain and abandoned themselves for the sake of gain to Babel, error, and perished in Korah, rebellion. Before we take a step back, let's look at a few more chapters related to each other, but these are going to be the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees. This is going to start with Enoch 6, 1 through 8. It came to pass in those days that the children of men multiplied, beautiful and fair daughters were born unto them. The angels, the sons of heavens, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose wives from among the children of men, and beget children. And their leader Azazel said to them, I'm afraid that you may not truly agree to do this deed, and I alone will have to pay the penalty of this great sin. They all answered him, saying, We should all swear to bind ourselves by the multitude oath, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. So all together they bound themselves by an oath. There are 200 total that descended in the days of Jared upon Adris, the summit of Mount Hermon. They called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by an oath upon it. These are the names of the leaders: Semjaza, their leader, Acrabel, Ramiel, Acabel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Daniel, Zekuel, Bacrael, Azazel, Amariels, Batrael, Anuel, Zachubel, Samuels, Sapaterel, Turael, Yamruel, Sariel. These leaders led the rest of the 200 angels. Enoch 7, 1 through 2. Each of the 200 chose a wife for himself, and they began to go into them and to mate with them, and they taught them sorcery and enchantments and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. These women became pregnant and gave birth to great giants, whose heights reached up to 3,000 ells. These giants consumed all the food, and when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them, then and devoured mankind. They also began to sin against the birds and the bees and the reptiles and the fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. All right, so when we read that and we compare it to Genesis 6, we see quite a difference. We see a lot of corruption going on, and also falling sons of gods, the angels, coming down to corrupt mankind, to destroy the earth. So we're going to jump into Jubilees 7, 21 through 24 here, and compare it to these two chapters of Enoch. For owing to these three, the flood came on the earth, namely owing to the fornication wherein the watchers against the law of their ordinances went whoring after the daughters of men, and took wives for themselves for all which they chose. And they made the beginning of the uncleanness. And they begot sons, the Nephilim, and they were all unlike, and they devoured one another. And the giants slew the Nephilims, and the Nephilim slew the Elion, and the Elion mankind, and one man another, and every one sold himself to work and quality, and to shed much blood, and the earth was filled with inequality. And after this, they sinned against the beasts and the birds and all that moveth and walked on the earth, and much blood was shed on the earth, and every imagination and desire of men imagined vantly and evil continually. So both of these stories between Enoch and Jubilees right here talk about them being so sinful that they sinned on against the birds and the beasts and devoured each other, and mankind devoured each other. When we look at all these connection stories within Genesis, Enoch, and Jubilees, we can see the story of Revelations unfold in front of us. Also, from the last topic of the first sin and all the falling sons of God in the previous sections, Genesis 6 seems to make this seem like a mystery if you don't know the New Testament well enough. The book of Peter, Jude, and Revelation seem to somewhat fill in the gap for you, but the whole backing story is kind of left out when we compare this story to all the Greek mythology, the Egyptian hieroglyphics and papyrus of the different books like the Book of the Gates, the Book of the Heavens, the Book of the Dead, and other well-known Egyptian writings. It kind of gives me a bit of a thought. Was the Book of Revelations written during Genesis 6 time? When we put the story of Enoch into Genesis 6, we get a story that makes the book of Revelations come alive, along with other New Testament books. Or did John have all these stories and then put them together in Revelations? The book of Jasher also is another story that fills in the blanks of other known stories in Genesis 6 as well. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves in Genesis 6:3 says, man's day shall be 120 years. What did this mean? Some interpret that we only live to be 120 years now. Genesis 6:3-4 via ESV. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. If we flip to the book of Jasher, it says that this was a time that God gave man to repent, or he is sending the flood. We jump a little ahead with Noah being in the story. Jasher 5:9-11. And Noah and Methuselah spoke all the words of the Lord to the sons of men day after day, consistently speaking to them. But the sons of men would not hearken to them, nor inclined their ears to their words, and they were stiff-necked. And the Lord granted them a period of 120 years, saying, if they will return, then will God repent of the evil, so as not to destroy the earth. And this brings us to 1 John 3:11-19. For this is the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We should not be like Cain, who was the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteous. Do not be surprised, brothers, that the world hates you. Now that we rewind things and take the story back a little bit to understand this point, we have to go back to Seth, where we left off. And that brings us to the book of Jasher, chapter 2. I'm going to read you the chapter 2 of Jasher. This is going to take you from Jasher all the way to Enoch. Jasher 2. And it was in the 130 year of the life of Adam upon the earth. And he again knew Eve, his wife. And she conceived and bore a son, his likeness, in his image. And she called his name Seth. saying, because God has appointed me another seed in the place of Abel, for Cain has slain him. And Seth lived 105 years, and he begot a son. And Seth called his name of his son Enos, saying, because in that time the sons of men began to multiply and to afflict their souls and hearts by transgression, by rebelling against God. And it was in the days of Enos that the sons of men continued to rebel and to transgress against God, to increase the anger of the Lord against the sons of men. And the sons of men went and they served other gods, and they forgot the Lord who had created them in the earth. And in those days, the sons of men made images of brass and iron, wood and stone, and they bowed down and served them. And every man made his god, and they bowed down to them. And the sons of men forsook the Lord all the days of Enos and his children, and the anger of the Lord was kindling on account of their works, an abomination which they did in the earth. And the Lord caused the waters of the river Gora to overwhelm them, and he destroyed and consumed them, and he destroyed the third part of the world. And notwithstanding this, the sons of men did not turn from their evil ways, and their hands were yet exalted to do evil in the sight of the Lord. In those days there were neither sowing nor reaping in the earth, and there was no food for the sons of men, and the famine was very great in those days. And the seed which they sowed in those days in the ground became thorns, thistles, and burrs. For from the days of Adam was the declaration continuing the earth of the curse of God, which he cursed the earth on the account of the sin which Adam sinned before the Lord. And it was when men continued to rebel and transgress against God and to corrupt their ways that the earth also became corrupt. And Enos lived 90 years, and he begotten Canaan. And Canaan grew up, and he was 40 years old, and he became wise, and had knowledge and skill in all wisdom. And he reigned over all the sons of men, and he led the sons of men to wisdom and knowledge. For Canaan was a very wise man, and had understanding in all wisdom. And with the wisdom he ruled over spirits of demons. And Canaan knew by his wisdom that God would destroy the sons of men for having sinned upon the earth, and that the Lord would in the later days bring upon them the waters of the flood. And in those days Canaan wrote upon tablets of stone that was to take place in time to come, and he put them in his treasures. And Canaan reigned over the whole world, and he turned some of the sons of men to the service of God. And when Canaan was 70 years old, he begotten 3 sons and 2 daughters. And these are the names of the children of Canaan. The name of the first son, Mephibosheth, the second, Anlin, the third, Merid, and the sisters were Adel and Zillah. These were the 5 children of Canaan that were born to him. And Lamech, the son of Methuselah, became related to Canaan by marriage, and he took his 2 daughters for his wives. And Adel conceived and bare a son to Lamech, and she called his name Jabal. And she again conceived and bare a son, and called his name Jubal. And Zillah, her sister, was barren in those days, and had no offspring. For in those days the sons of man begotten to trespass against God, and to transgress the commandments which he had commanded to Adam, to be fruitful and multiply in the earth. And some of the sons of men caused their wives to drink a draught that would rather them barren, in order that they might retain their figures, and whereby their beautiful appearance might not fade. And when the sons of men caused some of their wives to drink, Azazel drank with them. And the children-bearing women appeared abominable in the sight of their husbands as widows. Witless their husbands lived, for to the barren ones only they were attracted. And in the end of the days and the years, when Zillah became old, the Lord opened her womb, and she conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Tubal-Cain, saying, After I had withered away have I obtained him from the Almighty God. And she conceived again and bore a daughter, and she called her name Naamah. She said, After I had withered away have I obtained pleasure and delight. And Lamech was old and advanced in years, and his eyes were dim, that he could not see. And Tubal-Cain, his son, was leading him, and it was one day that Lamech went into the field, and Tubal-Cain, his son, was with him. And whiles they were walking in the field, Cain, the son of Adam, advanced towards them, for Lamech was very old and could not see much, and Tubal-Cain, his son, was very young. And Tubal-Cain told his father to draw his bow, and with the arrows he smote Cain, who was yet far off, and he slew him, for he appeared to him to be an animal. And the arrow entered Cain's body, although he was distant from them, and he fell to the ground and died. And the Lord required Cain's evil account to his wickedness, which he had done, and to his brother Abel, according to the word of the Lord which he had spoken. And it came to pass, when Cain had died, that Lamech and Tubal went to see the animal which they have slain. And they saw, then beheld Cain, their grandfather, was fallen dead upon the earth. And Lamech was very much grieved at having done this. And in collapsing his hands together, he struck his son and caused his death. And the wives of Lamech heard of Lamech had done, and they sought to kill him. And the wives of Lamech hated him from that day, because he slew Cain and Tubal-Cain. And the wives of Lamech separated from him, and would not hearken to him in those days. And Lamech came to his wives, and he pressed them to listen to him about this matter. And he said to his wives, Adel and Zillah, Hear my voice, O wives of Lamech. Attend to my words, for now you have imagined and said that I slew a man with my wounds, and a child with the stripes. For there have done no violence, but surely now that I am old and gray-headed, and that the eyes are heavy through age, and I did this unknowingly. And my wives of Lamech listened to him in this matter, and they returned to him with the advance of their father Adam. But they bore no children to him from that time, knowing that God's anger was increasing in those days against the sons of men, to destroy them with the waters of the flood for their evil doings. So here I want to point out to you a section here in Jasher 2:20 through 22 that we read. And some of those sons of men caused their wives to drink a draught that would render their barren, in the order that they might retain their figures, and whereby their beautiful appearance might not fade. And when the sons of men caused some of their wives to drink, Zillah drank with them. And the children-bearing women appeared abominable in the sight of their husbands as widows, while their husbands lived, for to the barren ones only they were attracted. That right there is talking about today's times, with basically a few different ways we can talk about that. We have birth control and abortions. And I'm going to talk to you about in the Book of Enoch, where it talks about this as well in this same time. It talks about it in chapter 69 that we were just in, Enoch 69:12. And the fifth was named Casteia, he who showed the children of men all the wicked smiting of the spirits and demons, and the smiting of the embryo in the womb, that it may pass away, and the smiting of the soul, and the bites of the serpent, and the smiting which befalls through the noontide heat, the son of the serpent named Tapite. This isn't the first time that it talks about abortion in Enoch. We're going to jump to chapter 99, verse 5. And in those days, the destitute will abort and mangle their own children, and they will abandon them so that their children will perish through them. They will abandon their infant and not return to them, and will have no pity on their beloved ones. Again, I swear to you, sinners, that sin and prepared for a day of unceasing bloodshed. So today's abortions and birth control are nothing new. That has been going on for the beginning of times. This is talked about in the book of Jasher and in the book of Enoch. And not all the men in those days were corrupt, as we talked, like Enoch was a very righteous man. So was his grandfather and his father. Seth was a righteous man. And in Jubilees 4:11 through 12, and in the 5th week of the 5th Jubilee, Seth took Ezra, his sister, to be his wife. And in the 4th, she bore him Enos. He began to call on the name of the Lord on the earth. So right there in Jubilees, it's saying that Seth, he prophesied about the Lord. He worshiped the Lord, and he prophesied what his father taught him, because he scribed down Adam's information about what he prophesied, and they put it on the pillars of brick and stone. And not only did he prophesy, Canaan wrote it down on the tablets that he put in his treasure. So we're going to look into Josephus. He's going to talk about how Seth had Enos, and Enos built a government that he passed on to his son Canaan. And this government, he was the ruler, and that's how Canaan became the ruler. All right, so this is Jewish Antiquities. This is chapter 3, verse 4. For indeed, Seth was born when Adam was in his 230th year, who lived 930 years. Seth begotten Enos in his 205th year, who, when he had lived 912 years, delivered the government to Canaan, his son, whom had in his 119th year he lived 905 years. Canaan, when he lived 910 years, had his son Methuselah, who was born in his 117th year. This Methuselah, having lived 895 years, died, leaving his son Jared, whom he begotten when he was in his 116th year. He lived 962 years. And then his son Enoch succeeded him, who was born when his father was 162 years old. Now he, when he had lived 365 years, he departed and went to God. Thus it is that they have not written down his death. So Josephus is talking about this time here where there have reign over the sons of God, Canaan. And it confirms this. It is for sure happening. And we look into this, that at that time, Adam's line through Seth were the righteous men of God, and that Canaan's side took on upon the evil. But if we get into the Zohar, we can look at another section about Seth. In Zohar Barath, section 1, in replication, God propagated mankind from Seth and made him the forefather of all the righteous who lived since. And if we go down the page just a little bit, on page 80, and it goes into 81, it talks about how man had skill in magic. And we talked about this in the Book of Enoch earlier, of the falling sons of God, the Watchers, taught man how to do sorcery. In the time of Enos, men were skilled in magic and divination, and in the art of controlling the heavenly force. Adam had brought with him from the Garden of Eden the knowledge of the leaves of the tree, but he and his wife and their children did not practice it. When Enos came, however, he saw the advantage of these arts and how the heavenly courses could be altered by them. And he and his contemporaries studied them and practiced magic and divination. From them, these are the descendants of the generations of the flood, were practiced for evil purposes by all the men of that time. Relying upon these arts, they defied Noah, saying that divine justice could never be exalted upon them, since they knew a way to avert it. The practice of these arts consumed with Enos, and hence it said of his time, then was the name of the Lord called upon provenently. All the righteous men that were among them sought to restrain them, such as Jared, Methuselah, and Enoch, but without success. The world became full of sinners who rebelled against their master, saying, "What is the Almighty that we should serve him? This is not so foolish as it sounds," for they knew all the arts we have mentioned, and all the ruling chieftains in charge of the world, and of this knowledge they relied, until the length God disabused them by restoring the earth of its primitive state, by covering it with water. And Enos prophesied about God, but here he was practicing magic. But we saw in the Dead Sea Scrolls that he prophesied about God, and in the Pool of Great Price, he prophesied about God. But the great thing is he repented, if you look at this. He repented because there had to be a baptism for him. His father was in the works of the Lord, and his grandfather, who was Adam, was the one who prophesied about God. So the great thing is he got baptized just like Simon did. Simon in Acts 8, 9 through 13. But there was a man named Simon who had previously practiced magic in the city and amazed the people of Samaria, saying that he himself was somebody great. They all paid attention to him, from the least to the greatest, saying, "This man is the power of God that is called great." And they paid attention to him because for a long time he amazed them with his magic. But when they believed Philip as they preached good news about the kingdom of God and the name of Jesus Christ, they were baptized, both men and women. Even Simon himself believed, and after being baptized, he continued with Philip, and seeing signs and great merciful performed, he was amazed. So now Simon got baptized and repented for his sins. So Enos could have got baptized and repented for his sins that he had started playing around with magic. Now that we have taken a step back to Genesis 6, 1 through 2, and looked at what Semjaza and Azazel started the second time around, we can see in the Book of Enoch that this time brought more corruption this time around than the first time. Enoch chapter 8, 1 through 4. Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and armor from the metals of the earth. He taught the women how to see behind them, how to make bracelet ornaments and other kinds of jewelry using precious stones and beautifying of the eyes with makeup of various colors. They led them astray into fornication and ungodliness, and they became corrupt in all the ways. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cutting. Amoros taught how to resolve enchantments. Barachel taught the knowledge of the clouds, astrology. Azrael taught the course of the moon. As mankind began to perish, they cried out to heaven. We can see in the book of Jasher and Enoch, it talks about the first form of abortion and birth control being in the beginning of evil. And right now, in 2025, abortion happens daily, and people are wanting to kill off their fetus inside of them to benefit their lifestyle. They have no pity in doing it, and they don't believe in God either. They believe it is their body and their choice to abort their child. Medicines and source of root cutting and all that was back then taught in those days to do things like that. If we go back to Jasher, where we read in Jasher, it talked about how they worshipped different gods. They made their gods out of bronze and they worshipped their gods. And we can talk about here in Revelations 13, 1 through 3. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads and 10 dominions on the horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and his mouth was like a lion's mouth. And on it, the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. And the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. They were worshiping the dragon and the beast. They were worshiping more than one. Right here in Revelations 13:4. And they worshiped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" After all this corruption of worshiping false gods, the dragon and the beast, Semjaza and Azazel, all those in heaven were ready for war. As the war starts in Revelations 12 and Jude 6 talks about the eternal chains placed on the falling sons of God and angels who did not stay in their position in heaven. The archangels see all of this, and in chapter 9 of Enoch, they ask God, what is the plan for Azazel and Semjaza? Enoch 9, 1 through 11. Then Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel looked down from the heaven and saw all the blood shed upon the earth by the extreme lawlessness. They said one to another, "The earth is laid waste, and the voice of all the dead cries out to the gate of heaven, saying, Bring our cause before the Most High." They said to the Lord, the King of lords, and the gods of gods, and kings of kings, the throne name is holy, endures throughout all the ages, and your name is holy, glorious, and blessed unto all the ages. You have made all things, and have power over all things, and you see all things. Nothing is hidden from you. You see what Azazel has done, teaching unrighteousness on earth and revealing the eternal secret concealed in heaven. Semjaza and those he has authority over have taught sorcery, and they have defiled themselves by sleeping with the daughters of men and revealed to those women these kinds of sins. These women have begotten giants, and by their children the whole earth has been filled with blood and unrighteousness. Now the souls of the dead were dying out of the gates of heaven because of the lawlessness which has taken place on the earth. You know all things before they come to pass. You allow this, but have not told us what we should do to the giants who are destroying your creation. We can tie this to Jude 6 in the New Testament, and the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling place. He has kept an eternal change under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. So we have this falling sons of God being looked at by the angels in heaven, and they're asking God what they should do. This whole story that we're talking about right here is also talked about by church father Justin Martyr. So our old church father, Justin Martyr, writes about it, and this is what he says. This is in the Apologies of Justin Martyr, and the second apology, chapter 5. God, when he had made the whole world and subjected things earthly to man and arranged the heavenly elements of the increase of fruit and rotation of the seasons, and appointed the divine law for these things also, he evidently made for man, committed the care of men and of the all things under heaven to angels transgressed this appointment, and were captived by love of women, and begotten children who are those that are called demons. And besides, they afterwards subdued the human race to themselves, partly by magical writings, and partly by fears of the punishment they accusationed, and partly by teaching them to offer sacrifices and incense and libations, of which things they stood in need after they were enslaved by lustful positions. And among men they sowed murders, wars, and adulteries, intemperate deeds, and all wickedness, which also the poets of the mythologists, not knowing that was the angels and those demons who had been begotten by them, that did these things to men and women and the cities and the nations, which they related, ascribed them to God himself, and to those who were accounted to be his very offspring, and to the offspring of those who were called his brothers, Neptune and Pluto, and to the children against these their offspring, for whatever name each of the angels had given to himself and his children by the name they called them. Justin Martyr just told us about the corruption that the falling sons of gods came down and created with the corruption of magic and sleeping with women and defiling themselves with them, creating adultery. Josephus talks about how they became giants and Noah had to hide himself. Well, we'll get into that story soon. But right now, we are talking about the time that all these corruptions came apart. First, we got to get into the prophecy of Noah. But that part right now, we kind of brought out last episode. And in the last episode, we talked about Josephus saying that the sons of God created this corruption. If we look at the Book of Revelations, this story just looks just like it. And we could look at another story that looks like the Book of Revelations, is the writings on the pyramids and the Egyptian papyrus. We could look at the story of Apophis and Set. Their story is within different Egyptian books and also on the pyramids that are in Egypt. From the early beginning in the early dynasty period, around 3150 to 2613 BCE, in Egyptian mythology, they have a similar story of deities, the gods Set and the demon Apophis. Apophis is the Egyptian demon of chaos, who is in the form of a serpent. Apophis was the most dangerous Egyptian god deity of chaos. The eyes of Apophis were feared, and the sound of his roar would shake the underworld. The movement of his body created earthquakes. He was embodied in darkness and represented pure evil. He was viewed as the greatest threat to the light of the sun god Re. He was the enemy of the light and the lord of chaos. Apophis looks like a giant serpent snake of crocodile, also combination of the two, looking to be in the form of like a dragon. The Egyptian god Set was the god of war, of chaos and violence, of storm and disorder, that had a mystical animal head in the shape of donkey, crocodile, griffin, hippopotamus, or an anteater, and would appear in the color of red. Set was not first looked at as an evil god until he killed his brother Osiris in the attempt to take over Egypt. Set was the only god who could control or kill Apophis through the night till dawn. No matter how many times Set killed Apophis at night, Apophis would resurrect and be back the next night to bring destruction upon the sun god Re. Set was involved in love spells, and his name was inscribed in amulets used as love charms. The Greek associated Set with their god monster Typhon, who got thrown into Tartarus after being defeated by Zeus. If we can put the relationship to Revelations with this story of the Egyptian gods of Apophis and Set, we could see that the serpent is taken over by the beast, and they worshipped the beast, who was Set. The dragon, who was Apophis, was the one of destruction, and everyone feared him. It says here in the book of Revelations on that. Revelation 13:4, and they worshiped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? Well, the beast, Set, he was the only one who could take on Apophis, the dragon. He was the only one who could defeat him. And so, of course, they worshipped him in Egypt. He was worshipped. And one of the reasons why I bring this story up is because in the following sons of God, when we go back to Enoch, chapter 8, 1 through 2, Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and armor from the metals of the ground. He was the Lord of war, the Lord of chaos, of violence and destruction. He taught the women how to see behind them, how to make bracelets, ornaments, and other kinds of jewelry using precious stones, and the beauty of the eyes with makeup of various colors. This led them astray into fornication and ungodliness, and they became corrupt in all their ways. And this right here points to Set and his enchantments of putting love spells on people. He would use the precious stones that he had them create with to create love enchantments so that they could have fornication. The people would fall in love with him, and he would be this goddess of fornication. And we could see the connection because they go hand in hand. Azazel, he got thrown into the bottomless pit, and so did Set by Zeus was thrown into Tartarus. This is where we can make many connections of the falling sons of God. When did he come into the picture? Azazel. He came into the picture when the first set of falling sons of God came down during the Garden of Eden story of the serpent. He was there with Gaddarel. He continued to push on the corruption of all. He stayed, and the rest went back up to heaven and regrouped and made another plan in the day of Jared. And this is going to put a wrap for part 6 of Enoch the Theological Story. This connection between the Egyptian hieroglyphics of the mythology of their gods can kind of really point a new perspective on the Book of Enoch. It really gives you the eyes to open on the Egyptian stories for the Book of Revelation as well. Where did it all start? Where did this all begin? And we're going to get more into this story of the falling sons of God here in part 7. See you then.